I think it's crucial to put these European Parliament elections in context. This is the world's second largest exercise of democracy after India's. 400 million voters across 28 countries competing for this European Parliament, where there are 751 MEPs in total. But you know, the stakes of this are really who can speak for Europe, who has the platform to speak on behalf of Europe, and for which Europe they're going to speak. I think one of the main takeaways from this election is that politics in Europe are Europeanizing. For years, pundits hailed the rise or the return of the nation state, and they pointed to the European Union as evidence of that. So we saw Brexit, we saw Frexit, Grexit, Italexit, and so on. In the last 3 years, almost all these calls have gone silent. And all of these programs, even Marine Le Pen, who asked people to call her Miss Frexit, have scrubbed their programs of references to exiting the European Union. And what that means is that, but you know, we've seen a fortification of the European Union on the outside, namely there's no more calls for exit, but we've seen an intensification of competition for grabbing power from the inside. So this is what we would call, you know, the transnationalization of politics. And there's real promise here as well as real perils. On the promise side, you know, Democracy in Europe movement, DiEM25, we were born to fight for transnational politics that didn't say, I'm German against the Greeks, I'm Greeks against the Germans, North against South, East against West, but built a kind of pan-European vision. And you know, we're seeing that in the uptick in voter turnout, as you mentioned in the intro, we're seeing a real investment in this thing called European politics. And that's fantastic because there's a recognition that many of the most important issues of our day, namely climate change, migration, these issues will not be solved at nation-state level. That's why we're pushing for things like a Green New Deal for Europe, which we hope the new Commission can introduce as a way of binding European countries together, building an energy union, and transforming the European economy in the process. Now, to the perils. You mentioned the gains made by the far right, and there too we're seeing a kind of transnationalization of the far right. No longer are these people fighting individual fights, they're banding together, as we would have seen at this rally in Milan when Salvini, who scored upwards of 30% in the vote, brought all these characters together. And they're doing well to put aside their differences to fight together. And the danger there is that the same pathologies we once associated with the nation state, an exclusive nationalism, a xenophobia, are just scaling up now and becoming exclusive Europeanism. So people like Salvini, people like Marine Le Pen, they may not be talking about the greatness of France or Italy in particular, but saying, I believe in a white Christian Europe. So you know, we're seeing this big battle over who can speak for Europe and whether that's going to be an exclusive all-white Europe or a much more progressive Europe with climate justice at its heart. All of the activism that has been done around Fridays for Future and demanding that, you know, climate get on the agenda is extremely important, and all this work is extremely admirable because it signals the arrival of climate politics to Europe. I mean, there is no party now who can claim not to have a plan around the climate. Even Marine Le Pen is speaking about environmentalism as patriotism, as a way of fulfilling the French nationalist dream. And I think that suggests a real danger here. You know, in the United States, we're so used to a polarization of the climate debate. You're a right-wing and you're a climate denier, or you're left-wing and you accept the climate, but you also accept various elements of the justice agenda that go along with it. In Europe, there's a much broader scope of what's possible under the umbrella of green politics. And this is very, very dangerous because it means that there's a lot of room for co-optation. I think that there's been a lot of optimism around the constructive ambiguity of a Green New Deal, right? We can throw many of our dreams and many of our best policies inside of that big idea, but there's a real danger there. When you've got people like Michel Barnier, who are, you know, chief bureaucrats and members of the center-right, who are speaking about the need for an EU Green New Deal, that's fantastic. But it cannot be just about carbon taxes. It cannot be just about coal divestment. It has to be part of a broader transformative vision. And I think that, you know, here the onus is on the Green Party. If they're going to be the primary beneficiaries of this swing towards climate politics, they've got to lead in demanding a Green New Deal for Europe. This is precisely what was at the core of DiEM25's program, of our coalition called European Spring. We were trying to hack this to build a transnational movement for a Green New Deal for Europe, because the worst thing that could happen is that the Green New Deal ends up as a series of small technocratic fixes instead of a real transformative vision that brings people together. You know, in the same way that when the left betrays its principles and implements things like austerity, as Syriza has done here and is now reaping the bitter harvest of its failures with the Greek people. So if the Greens fail to deliver a proper transformative vision for green politics that brings along working class people, I promise you it will take the sails out of the green agenda as well and put further fuel into the far right. Now you asked me about how Yanis and I in our movement fared. I think it's crucial to contextualize that in a broader night of sort of how did the left fare, putting the Labour Party also into context. You mentioned in the intro these really tragic, narrow losses for Ada Colau and Manuela Carmena in Spain. I think it's crucial to kind of get a grip on what really is happening with the left. There's there's reasons to be cheerful in this election and reasons to be depressed. Now, when I speak about our transnational movement, we tried something a bit crazy, which was to forego traditional party structures, forego their traditional party bases, and all the resources that flow from the public coffers, and try to build something new and transnational. And we're very proud of the progress we were able to make with that, even if we fell short in the case here, in the case of Greece. They're telling us now that we fell 0.01% below the threshold to enter European Parliament. So we're still working through it. But let's talk for a second about the broader sort of annihilation of the left. I mean, this applies to us, it applies to the Labour Party, it applies to Jean-Luc Mélenchon in France, it applies to Die Linke in Germany. What happened here? I think what happened here is two crucial things. One is the left failed to ground the climate question in the social justice one. We failed to grip that climate question and say there will be no green transition without an economic transition that ends austerity. And you look at the way that Bas Eickhout is talking about climate, does he mention austerity? Does he mention the suffering sweeping through Southern Europe at the hands of the Troika? No, he doesn't. So that was failure number one. Failure number two, though, that we have to grapple with is the problem of fragmentation. I think in the US, we've gotten used to a two-party system, a Democratic Party that necessarily builds a broad church and forces liberals to fight with leftists, to fight with all sorts of other types. And they have to arrive at some consensus, or they don't, but they will usually stand behind one candidate. Europe's party structures means there's basically infinite room for fragmentation, infinite room for egos on the left to split up between each other, and infinite room for the left to pick up on minor differences and let itself lose its place as speaking with one voice on behalf of workers and their families across Europe. So this is really our challenge.